Good morning, early morning on the Pacific Northwest. This is Dr. Matthew Dunn, host of The Future of Email Marketing, and my guest, a man I've been wanting to talk to about this topic for a long stretch now, is Chad S. White, author and head of research at Oracle Marketing Consulting. Chad, so glad to finally get to talk to you about this, man.
Oh, excited. Good morning to you.
Yeah. I did look up your LinkedIn bio, even though we've been acquainted for a while, but I didn't realize you were a Texas A&M Aggie, but I decided we could go ahead and have the conversation anyway. Hook 'em horns. Uh,
All right. Thank you for forgiving me. I think with that said, it is worth pointing out that both my mom and my dad went to UT. That's where they met and fell in love. So we have
yeah, we have
you
bond
know,
there.
yeah. So it used to be that the rivalry was not so intense. It
Oh, you
used to
think?
be
You
There
think?
was there was a time when it was somewhat amicable, and then there was a time when it was insane. And I
Insane.
feel like now it's not really that insane. They're not in the same sports
Yeah,
leagues anymore. So I feel like it's way
that's
cooling down.
right.
But
That's the
yes,
key right
so
there.
I'm a product of both sides of the
both
Texas fracture.
by both phenomenal institutions. I have to say, Texas higher ed is really something, and just keeps going on this up trajectory. Yay for oil money, I guess. So, Chad, you have written 3 books and well over 3,000 posts about email. Is it fair to say this is kind of your subject area?
It does seem like I've staked it out, doesn't
It
it?
does, doesn't it?
Yeah, as I'm sure you know from looking at my LinkedIn bio, I'm a journalist by training.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I feel like writing is in my blood, and I like explaining things. I like thinking about new ways, like new angles to look at things and sort of break it down and try to organize it, and have like sort of the step by step. So, I really love email marketing because it supplies all the things that my journalistic brain needs, which
Mhm.
is mainly constant change,
Yeah.
which I feel like email marketing really delivers in spades. Sometimes maybe too much, been a lot of change the last couple of years. Could deal with a little less change,
Yeah.
but but honestly, like that's the thing that fuels me. There's never a dull moment in the world of email marketing.
So
There's
so
always a new development.
so you're really getting to, I mean, continue journalism in the fundamental sense in what you're doing now. That's awesome. I remember
Absolutely.
you and I talked about Apple MPP, which we'll get to early on, and I remember one of the things that you said that I thought was like, "Oh, that's so cool." You said, "I'm not thinking about the impact now. I'm thinking about the impact 12, 24 months from now, for our customers," which I thought was uh, a much more useful framework on what's this particular change going to do than what's it going to do tomorrow. Because tomorrow's, we won't know, honestly. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's really easy to fall into that, right? Where you start to kind of triage the moment. And
yeah,
I mean, it's not just MPP, but all kinds of other things. We often think like, hey, what is this doing right now? And
yeah,
I think you can see that in our reaction to like the rise of smartphones,
yeah.
where we were very slow to like adopt mobile-friendly email design. It took, in my mind, way too long.
Way too
And
long.
part of it was like, oh, well, right now only like, 2% or 3% of emails are opened on mobile. So like we don't need to worry
It's no
about
big
like,
deal.
it's no big deal. But like that changed. I also remember, you know, um, back at the turn of the millennium, I was covering retail at that point, and there was all this stuff about online retail. It's like 1% of the market. Like, it's
Yeah,
not a big deal. And there were people speculating, like, oh, well, what happens if it goes to 3%? What will that do? And here we are now. It's like, a huge part of the economy. And we can see by looking at, countries like China that there's way more like
yeah.
headway
Way more.
that can be made.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think it always pays to like appreciate the moment, but then think, all right, well, what is this going to look like? Yeah, 12, 24 months into the future, because a lot of times it takes a bit of doing to get ready for that 12 months, 24 months into the future. And I feel like that's certainly what we try to do with our clients here at Oracle Marketing Consulting is obviously, deal with the moment, but then, try to create a roadmap and a plan for how you're going to deal with things, 12 months, 24 months in the future, because a lot of times that takes a lot of trial and error to kind of get there. And if you don't take the time now to start that trial and error process, and if you start that, much, much later, well, now you've just sort of delayed getting in sync with
Yeah.
what's going on.
Don't just adapt to today's change. What are there any common threads to the things that you find yourself and your colleagues having to steer clients through over a year, 2 year span? Things that they don't have in place that really, for now and for a couple of years from now, they ought to, that you help them do.
Yeah. So, and I feel like the last 2 years have been really tough. I'm definitely a planner by nature. I love to plan like a year of content. I like to have that long roadmap, so you can really plan to like weave things together and have like a cohesive narrative. And for the bigger projects, make sure you do them right. It's hard to spin up a big project in you know a few weeks or a couple of months. It takes time. But the last 2 years have been really challenging because we keep getting thrown like major curveballs that have been so disruptive that you kind of have to kind of scrap everything you're doing.
Mm.
That happened at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
That was not like the things that happened in 2020 were not the things that everyone was planning on focusing on, but everything got thrown into upheaval, and all of a sudden the plans had to change. And so, in some ways it's we got to see this interplay of like, being nimble, versus making plans. And you do need both. I hope people don't get turned off of the idea of like long-term planning. But, I think one of the things when I think about like, the future of email, one of the things that I can't help but think about is just how much disruption we've had recently. And I'm a realist, who wants to be an optimist. I'm definitely not a pessimist. But it does seem like there's just a lot of challenges, waiting just in the future. I mean, if you look at what's going on, right now, we've got, Russia invading Ukraine. You have China clearly watching what's happening there
Yeah.
because they at some point probably are going to invade Taiwan to take
Yeah.
that back. So
Yeah.
I think they're watching very carefully. So depending on how that goes, we could see China making a move on Taiwan this year, perhaps.
Hmm.
That's not great. We've seen everybody scrambling to like rejigger their supply chains to not have, doing business in Russia. That's going to be 1,000 times more difficult if China becomes the next, pariah that you're not allowed to do business with.
Mm.
I mean, this is obviously a huge risk that we've embedded in our system because we seem to be very comfortable doing business with autocrats when, they give us good terms on manufacturing or what have you. But now we're in a predicament, which obviously China will try to exploit. I think also, here in the US, political tensions are going to rise once again, going into the fall, into the midterms.
Yeah.
I think it's unavoidable. We have systemic structural problems to our democracy that nobody seems to want to fix.
Yeah.
So that's just going to become a new area of pain. Social tension is going to be rising soon. Either Roe v. Wade is going to get, gutted or completely overturned. It's going to set women's rights, like women's bodily autonomy rights back, 50 years.
Agreed.
That's not going to be great for anybody. And then, the pandemic, which we've been, really mired in for a long time. I think we're going to have a kind of quiet period here this summer, but my prediction is that, by the fall, probably back to school time, and then certainly going into the winter, we'll see it, crop up again, because immunity only lasts so long. Immunity from getting COVID is not that durable. It lasts only like 4 to 6 months. I mean, I know people who've gotten COVID 3 times now.
Three. Wow.
Three
Yeah.
times.
Talking to a few folks who've got it twice. A lot to unpack there, but I want to go back to
Sure.
sort of the top of it. Because in following email as a thread through all of this, one of the things that I'm not sure is as well understood about email as other commonly used digital channels is that nobody's really in charge of email. You know, it's a set of standards that anybody, in theory at least, can seize on, right to involve themselves in, and there's not a de facto monopoly or duopoly part, at least at the top end of that pipeline. And one of the reasons why that it takes, I think, one of the reasons that why, as a channel, it takes time to adapt, like you said, to mobile or more recently to MPP, is because there isn't a mythical them who's saying, okay, now we'll do X to respond to change. It's like it's a bunch of different companies, it's a bunch of different organizations figuring it out in different ways, and eventually you look in the rearview mirror, it's like, oh, I guess we all decided to do blah, blah, blah in relation to that change. That's now the, standard practice or something like that. Agreed?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think that's one of the things that's a strength for email marketing
Yeah,
is that it
agreed.
does have this like sort of decentralized
Yeah.
ownership structure.
Yeah.
And you see that certainly on sort of the ESP side of the house, but you also see it, with the inbox providers and mailbox providers.
Yeah.
Although certainly you could argue that we've got,
Yeah.
a bit of concentration.
Yeah.
When Apple can like almost single-handedly rewrite like some key rules of the game,
Yeah.
that tells you that there's quite a bit of concentration going on. Certainly more concentrated than it has been in the past. So yeah, I think that's like a real strength.
Agreed.
It keeps
Yeah.
it keeps the costs down. I think it keeps change also somewhat to a minimum. If you think about all the changes that that Gmail has put in place over the years or like
Mhm.
experimented with,
Mhm.
it takes multiple parties to agree to something in order for it to become
Yeah.
the status quo.
Yeah.
And so I think that's good. But so I didn't want to bring up all of that like sort of social turmoil just to bum everybody out.
No.
The reason why I brought it up is that I think it is having a pretty significant effect on email marketing and how we operate.
Yeah.
So for instance, like absolutely getting a crash course in crisis messaging and crisis response. Email has been like the channel that's
Yeah.
been used to communicate, just these kinds of disruptions to customers.
Yeah.
And also, like, I'm hard pressed to think of another period of time where email marketing campaigns have been paused more often than over the last 2 years.
Mhm.
It's just incredible. I think you have to go back really to 9/11 to think about a
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
when there was like wholesale pausing of campaigns.
Yeah.
And now we had them, a lot during some of the more serious Black Lives Matter protests,
Yep.
during the uncertainty following the 2020 election, during the January 6th insurrection. I think now during, the invasion of Ukraine, some brands have also paused. Like, I'm really hard pressed to think of a time when crisis
Yeah.
messaging and management has been such a key part of email marketing. And I think that's all really good because,
Yeah.
we don't operate in a bubble. We need to be aligned with what's going on
Yeah.
in the world and
Yeah.
with our consumers. So that's certainly a big thing. But I think it also reinforces this idea of this need for nimbleness. And we've seen that, I think, early in the pandemic and like really kind of like a clutch and impressive way. Like that was like a major curveball. And brands, I thought, did like a really masterful job of readjusting their plans, scrapping what they were planning on doing, and then asking themselves like really deep questions about, all right, what's going on with my customers now? What are they thinking about? What do they care about? What do they value? And how does my messaging need to change to get in line with them? And that's obviously the kinds of questions you should be asking yourself like every single day of your email marketing life. But there was, this moment when you knew things were changing in a significant way. And I thought brands just did a heck of a job adjusting to that. But it's now kind of baked into the system a little bit. Like we're having to engineer things to be that nimble because we were scrambling.
Yeah.
But now, things like modular email architecture, leaning into personalization, leaning into AI where it makes sense, STO and a bunch of other things, that helps you get really nimble. And you mentioned AMP before. I think AMP is going to be one of the casualties of all of this chaos.
Yeah.
I feel like it's
Not gonna make it.
coasting, and it's not coasting at a very fast speed at this point. But like, I don't feel like
No.
there are any wins,
No.
pushing AMP at this point, which makes me really sad. Because
Yeah, it is good innovation.
I love the idea
Yeah.
of
Interact.
subscribers being able to do more in the inbox, because there's a very clear barrier between emails and apps
Everything
and
else.
websites.
Yeah.
There's friction there.
Yeah.
And interactivity and AMP
Yeah.
lower that friction. So it makes me super sad that this is happening. But it does seem to be happening. Like this seems to be one of the casualties of all of this, unsettled activity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just seems to be.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably rabbit hole on AMP for a long time. I mean, I'm on record as my opinion is that it's technologically, architecturally the wrong approach. So from that somewhat narrow and admittedly geeky lens, I'm actually glad that that particular approach to interactivity isn't going to make the curve. The sad part is does that mean we'll never see I can do things in my inbox? And that's a slightly different conversation. Let's go back to the adapting to change thing though. And I'm just curious because you've got a broader lens on what companies are doing right now. In early days pandemic, we had a lot of surprisingly good, as you said, response from brands with how they shifted what they were doing in their email channel. Um, I have not seen a whole lot of bandwagon hopping on of Ukraine by brands in my inbox. Admittedly, it's only been about 5 days. And I'm actually glad to see that because if it were done distastefully, it pissed me off and I'd unsubscribe in a heartbeat.
It's a tricky thing because,
Thing.
yeah, I mean, here in the US, I mean, people are, just objectively more divided than we've probably ever been.
Yeah.
And often not for terribly rational reasons.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It makes it very difficult to navigate. So yeah, I think a lot of the reaction you're seeing right now is sort of more behind the scenes, and more in sort of like the PR realm rather than in the marketing realm.
Marketing realm. That's good.
Right. So Oracle, we just stopped doing business in Russia,
Saw that.
as of yesterday, which is in my mind fantastic.
Fantastic.
But not everybody is concerned
Yeah.
about Russia attacking Ukraine, and some people seem to think, for whatever reason, it's a great savvy thing to do. So it's a tricky thing. I think this is one of the things that is very tricky for brands right now, is that social values is becoming really, really important in many ways. Like you see with Spotify, consumers aren't letting brands stay neutral. They're forcing them to pick a side. And at the same time, like, consumers won't let brands like stay silent. So like, it puts brands in this position where before they used to like do everything possible, like if they were engaged in any kind of way, to be so behind the scenes. And in this day and age, like, it's too easy to ferret them out, and it forces them to be on the record, which in some ways is good. It makes them accountable for their actions. But at the same time, there's like, a little bit of a lose-lose in some of this proposition. But for some brands are very happily embracing this world that we live in, and like are very happy to pick a side. And other brands would rather like not make these choices.
Yeah.
I think they're still operating a little bit in this this 1980s mentality where like we're not going to pick a side. But
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to work out for them,
It's
unfortunately.
side story, but we actually had that conversation at Campaign Genius as we started getting some customers in the political email marketing space. And I said, "Bye, guys, there's a side I picked, and I'm not doing business with the other side, period. And it's a private company. If someone didn't like it, tough bananas, right? And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with the cost of doing business that way, granted at a modest scale. I think one of the factors in that, that increased visibility, though, is that there are, let's call them consumers, but put them up at the peak of the power curve that you always get. There are consumers with one heck of a loud voice. When Neil Young says, "Hey, Spotify," I'm not okay with that being on the same channel as my music. I'm yanking my music if you don't yank that. That's not just a consumer talking, although he is a consumer as well, right? It's a very high visibility, because we've handed out some megaphones to some folks, right? Individuals, some individuals have surprisingly big megaphones just because of the power curve structure of exposure on social media, and in part, that's one of the things that can hold brands accountable. For some reason, she's not my choice in music, but Taylor Swift comes to mind as someone who's got a megaphone for other causes, not just to amplify her music.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's been, in the business realm, there's been a lot of conversations about, who do you pay attention to? Do you pay attention to shareholders? Do you pay attention to employees? Do you pay
Right.
attention to stakeholders? Do we have any
Mm,
commitment at all to society?
yeah. Yeah.
Or are we just trying to maximize the amount of
Maximize
money that
shareholder
comes in
value.
the door,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Shareholder
Yeah.
value.
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge, huge conversation going on right now. And
Yeah.
I mean, my perspective is that it seems like the social contract side of things is winning. That to check a competitor, but
Glad to hear that.
Salesforce, I think,
Yeah.
has been very vocal
Yeah.
in saying, "Hey, look, we're not just a company.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're also employees, and we operate, in San Francisco and in America, and we want to make these places better."
Yep.
And for instance, when they were operating Exact Target, and there was all this stuff going on in Indiana that they thought was unfavorable to their employees, they offered to move their employees to other states.
Mhm.
They pulled events from that state to apply
Mhm.
pressure. I feel like that's where everybody's kind of being forced to go. And again, companies like Salesforce, seem to be eagerly embracing that role.
Yeah.
And other companies not so eagerly, but I do feel like that's where we are. I mean, here in America, I think part of it is that they're filling a void, right? Like our government
It's
doesn't
not doing
function properly
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
It can't do very many things
Yeah.
because of how it is structured.
Yeah.
And I think companies and influencers are
Yeah.
rallying to fill that huge power vacuum that currently exists.
Well, and there's also a degree to which, because the change wave of digital has run out in front of legislation and rules, which always happens in history, right? The companies that really succeeded there have reach and actions that they can take, that, call them quasi-governmental if you want, but they've got the capability to do that. And I think when you combine, let's call it the influencer CEO with the company, you see some change just like that. You mentioned Salesforce, right? Much of that emanates from Benioff for sure. But back to earlier, we mentioned MPP, the Apple deciding to change how they handled email. You can draw a straight, thick black line to Tim Cook's own stance on privacy and say it's very consistent, right? It was, from that perspective, it actually wasn't surprising when Apple said we're going to do X. And I wish they hadn't in some ways, but that it kind of fits everything else they've done, doesn't it?
I like the pivot away from the political now. That'd be nice. Let's leave that conversation behind. But I think that's a great segue, right? Power vacuum, right? Like privacy is one of these
Yeah.
areas
Yeah.
that the U.S. government has been really, really glacial on addressing, and now like that gap is just it's just enormous. I've been on the record of saying that CAN spam is really bad. And it's bad for businesses because it sets all the wrong expectations for how email marketers should behave. All the wrong expectations. And but yet
Yeah.
there it is.
That's the
It's
best we
still
can do.
there. It hasn't been changed. We've been talking about changing it forever.
Yeah.
And granted, obviously, lots of big problems, other things that can be addressed. But
Sure.
I'm a firm believer that we can, chew gum and walk at the same time. You can do little things while also tackling big things. But I think again, power vacuum.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
there's definitely been a lot of chatter about how Apple's just, they saw a need, it wasn't being addressed. And
Yeah.
so they stepped in and they used their power to improve privacy in a way that the government just simply has not been able to kind of catch up to what's going on.
Yeah.
And that to a certain degree does make sense. I've also been on the record as being, understanding why Apple did what they did and liking some aspects of it, but then feeling very aggrieved about other aspects of it. Mainly all the fake opens.
Yes.
I think that
Yes.
that is the thing for me that makes MPP incredibly troublesome. And it's because it directly impacts how email marketers stay aligned with their subscribers, with their customers,
So
on the deliverability front.
let me stick an asterisk in here so Chad and I don't play inside baseball too much. And the brief version of what he just said in sort of layman's term is that Apple decided that from a data perspective, opening every image in email, including pixels and other things, was a solution to privacy. What that means for email marketers is a flood of, as Chaz said, false opens where it looks like, oh, look, everyone with an iPhone found my subject line interesting and opened my email. So we're flying blind in a way that we haven't been for 20 years. Fair summary?
Yeah. I think the key thing here is that somewhere in the neighborhood of like 13, 14 years ago, Gmail was really the pioneer of what we call engagement-based spam filtering. Prior to that, you could have great deliverability if you sent emails and people didn't click the report spam button. And so marketers figured this out and they started to game it. So they would bulk up their list with all of these inactive subscribers, people who would, you could send to and they wouldn't complain and they didn't do anything else. They didn't open, they didn't click, they didn't buy anything, but they wouldn't complain because that was the rule. The rule was you just needed a low complaint rate. So they would massively expand their list and keep mailing and use a huge denominator to crush that complaint rate down. And so Gmail came along and said, no, I see what you're doing. You need to send email that not only people tolerate but actually engage with. And so they started tracking a variety of metrics to indicate, hey, like our users actually enjoy getting your emails. And that is the crux of the problem with MPP, is that opens, as flawed as they are, have been the number one and largely only way that we have been, trying to determine who is an engaged subscriber. So now it has thrown that entire definition into kind of complete chaos, really. And we're starting to kind of see the ramifications of this move by Apple. We had Validity over the holiday season put out a warning that they're seeing, increased deliverability issues. And in particular, the thing that was really interesting that they said is that they saw more senders hitting recycled spam traps. And recycled spam traps are email accounts that have been left dormant, abandoned by users. And at a certain point, which is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 years, those accounts get turned off, by the Yahoos and Gmails of the world. And then a little while later, they get turned back on and they're a spam trap. And so at that point, if you are sending to that email address, it's a sign of really poor list hygiene that you're emailing folks who haven't responded in what in many cases is like 3 years. And so the fact that people were hitting more recycled spam traps means that they were taking their look back window for engagement and they were making it just enormous. to get recycled spam, recycled spam traps, like you've got to have a huge look back window of like 3 years. So they were going deep, some of these brands, to hit those. That's the kind of problems we're going to start to have, because a lot of brands use like a 12-month look back window and say, hey, anybody who's opened an email in the last 12 months,
Yeah.
they're safe
Yeah.
to email.
Yeah.
But now with MPP, like, you're not seeing those real opens anymore in that window. So you're like, oh, wait, oh yeah, now let's look back 18 months instead. Okay, great. Yeah, now we picked up more visibility because of when MPP started.
Yeah.
But that, you can't keep doing that. You can't do that forever. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, we largely made it through the holiday season doing stuff like that.
But next year's holiday season, for example.
No, it's coming due. And, I hear through the grapevine that Spamhaus all of a sudden has become very active in a way that they haven't been in a while. And they haven't said that it's because of MPP, but it seems incredibly suspicious to me that all of a sudden Spamhaus is, is cracking down. So I think this summer is going to be bad. This fall is going to be bad. Brands, I hope, are actively looking to crack this new formula. And unfortunately, the new formula is tough. It's really tough. Because in my mind, it means you've got to look at activity, beyond email clicks. You've got to look at activity in other channels.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of figure out, all right, what's the appropriate look back window for, a recent purchase in terms of that being a proxy for email engagement? What's the look back window for web activity, or for an account login, or for app activity? That is the analog, that is the proxy for email engagement.
And it's a substitute, it's a proxy, but it's not the same thing for many kinds of businesses. And this is one of the problem sets, right? If you're e-commerce top to bottom, and you can go, oh, I sent Chad an email and Chad clicked and Chad bought a widget, go, okay, cool. If you're a publisher and you just would like to have Chad reading the thing you sent him, your feedback loop is dead.
Yeah, no, definitely certain brands are going to have way more difficulty with this than other ones. Yeah, if you're a high velocity, low cost, retailer where you're selling things that people buy like very routinely. If you're, say Target or Walmart, you're probably not going to have the same level of trouble as if, you're another brand that has a much longer replacement cycle that people don't buy as often. Or like you said, you're a media company where a lot of the value is just in reading the content of the email. But it's definitely, this is the trick, is that it is going to vary by industry. It's going to vary by your business model, and it's going to vary by your individual company and your audience. And that's the thing that's going to be super hard about this, because before we essentially all played by the same rules, which was you need to have opens from individual subscribers. And now all these different companies are going to have to find their own formula. Before it was just like, oh, it opens over what period of time. So it was only how large is the window, which would change based on your frequency and the engagement of your subscribers. So there weren't that many variables. It was actually a pretty tight formula, which I think is why it was so successful, right? Because it's a clear, in my mind, it's an awesome win for all the mailbox providers, because they had clear rules that we played by. And it was awesome for consumers because we sent the disengaged, subscribers less email. And that's the thing that makes me super worried right now, is because like that clear system, has had, two of the legs cut off the chair. And now we're balancing on the two remaining legs. It is highly unstable. And we've got to find a way to like at least stick one more leg under that chair to make it a sort of a wobbly tripod. Like we've got to do something. And it's tricky. Now, one of the things that I've heard a little bit of pushback on is that, people have said like, hey, why would we look at this like, this omni-channel behavior to determine what's going on in the email channel? And why would we use that as a proxy? And I've been stressing that, opens themselves have been a proxy. Like opens are a marketer invention. They are a proxy for reads, which we cannot see. And depending on who you listen to, they're not a very good proxy. But they have been an incredibly effective proxy. So maybe accuracy, not that great, doesn't matter, useful, very, very useful. Yes, a great indicator, even if the accuracy has been questionable. It doesn't really matter. But like that's the new realm that we're in, is that we have to find, new proxies to fill the void that's been caused by MPP. That's the part that's not great. Everything else about MPP, I think, is more or less fine in my mind.
It's like,
proxying IP locations, that's fine. Location is a highly sensitive thing. Now, I'm also like hard pressed to think of any case where marketers or anybody has used any, tracking pixel information in any kind of malicious way. So I feel like we're a little bit getting tarred by what's going on in the digital ad realm.
Yes.
We're a permission-based, channel, unlike anyway.
Yeah.
I think
you said send me the message with the pixel in it, right? You said send me this message, and I happened to put a pixel or a more interesting image in it. What's wrong with this? Well, contrast with Facebook pixels.
But people have argued like, okay, well, is the awareness of that clear? Like when people sign up for email, are they aware that there's a tracking pixel in there? And obviously, no. Most people are not really aware of that. Certainly at that level of detail. I think they do know we are tracking them, and there are very clear feelings about that. Some people don't like that, but other people very much like it and want us to use that information to serve them better. So there's like a contract there. But is there great awareness of that? I don't know that it's anywhere near sort of universal. One of the things I've heard is that, I heard someone say, well, when you send, direct mail, you don't know when people open that. And, my response to that is that this isn't direct mail. This is email. That's like saying, cars shouldn't be able to drive faster than horses, right? Because, we used to get around on horses, and,
it's fine.
So then now we're going to set like a ceiling based on the last generation of some communication channel or transportation method. That just seems kind of nonsensical to me. And again, I can't think of any cases where this information has been used in any sort of malicious way. Most subscribers expect us to pay attention to whether or not they're engaging with our messages. They certainly get really angry when we just like endlessly email them.
Which is what we're more likely to do now.
Which is what we're now way more likely to do. And they also don't like it when like the content, isn't reflective of their interests, and opens have been useful for that too. So I feel like we're at a little bit of like a lose-lose here, because, we really have the deck stacked against us.
Do you think that, and let's pick on Apple since we can, do you think Apple had a lot of awareness of this, I'll call it a side impact of the decision about how they were going to handle images and pixels in email?
So like from like a back-end server perspective for them, like that server, or just like the ramifications of what?
Just the ramifications, I think they had their Apple consumers and Apple's brand, to be blunt, front of mind in deciding to do this, because technologically very complex thing. Excuse me, things. Email marketing seems like roadkill to me.
Yeah, I don't know that they were thinking an awful lot about marketers, for instance. I don't know that they really care about marketers. I think this is one of the fundamental differences between, say, Apple and Gmail. Like, this is why I'll be super surprised if Gmail ever follows Apple's lead here.
About that,
because Google is about advertisers. It's about businesses. They're an ad company and a data company. And again, they pioneered engagement-based filtering. So by following in Apple's footsteps, they would essentially, obliterate like 13, 14 years of innovation in spam filtering, which in my mind, Gmail is still the gold standard in spam filtering. Like,
Good to hear.
they've eradicated spam so hard that consumers have essentially reimagined the definition of spam. Like, it used to be like, I remember what spam used to be. It was stuff you didn't ask for that was dangerous
Right.
and horrible.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, now spam is, when I get email from that brand I signed up to receive email from and I don't like it anymore. Like, that's what Gmail has done to spam. They have fundamentally changed the definition of the word because they are so great at blocking spam and blocking stuff that their users aren't engaging with anymore. And so, I find it really difficult to imagine them walking away from it. But from Apple's point of view, they're a consumer-driven company. I think this has been great for their brand and their brand image.
Yeah.
It also has been very good for their advertising business. And also super horrible for a lot of the other things that they're doing in the privacy space. They've been super horrible for a lot of their competitors and pseudo competitors. I mean, I keep thinking about all the times that Facebook has been like dragged in front of Congress to answer for its activities. Clearly, we should have been lobbying Apple and Google because it seems like Apple and Google are going to just crush Facebook. They've already lost hundreds of billions of dollars in market value, along with Snap and other brands in the social media sphere. So that, I think, is also like really interesting, is like the amount of power that Apple wields, not just, in the marketing sphere, but outside of that, and some of these privacy activities. Well, really, a lot. They're flexing super hard right now.
They're flexing super hard. It's one of the, if not the most brilliant brand pivots I've ever seen at a really, really macro scale, right? Like, who's the privacy company? Honey, who's the privacy company? Come on, they get to wear that mantle. You read the terms of service that you sign up for. It's like, excuse me? You want to track this and this and this and this? Well, yeah, but you're Apple. We're Apple. You can trust us, right? Not all those other guys. You can trust us.
There's definitely a little bit of talking out of both sides of their mouth, because they want. It's funny to watch how they phrase permissions for apps to track your activity, and how they phrase their permissions for how they track your activity.
Yes,
it is. The contrast is stark.
Very
stark.
You alluded to it, the app privacy protection that is so kneecapped. Facebook, personally, I'm like, oh, gee, that's gotta hurt. But that's just my perspective. Facebook never managed to get down to the metal relationship with their customers where Apple and arguably Google have, right? Like, you've got either an Apple or a Google OS in your pocket most hours of the waking day right now. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. And that is one heck of a locus of control. And now we're seeing that, that battle work its way out.
Yeah, no, it's, you look back at like browser wars and all that stuff. We're definitely like in like the OS wars now. The platform is the control. I think it's also interesting to see how this all plays out as both sides of the aisle here in the US become more concerned about monopolies and monopolistic power. I think that it is actually maybe one of the very few things that both sides seem to agree on, for very different reasons, but they seem to agree on, is that there's an over concentration of power. I think if you look back, to what is it, like the 1910s and 20s, when like Standard Oil and all those guys got broken up. I mean, shoot, like we broke up AT&T for less reasons. I don't think they were as powerful as Alphabet, and frankly, Amazon too. Like, we have some incredibly powerful companies now.
If they were as powerful, at least in the States, the AT&T, ridiculously overlapped relationship with the government had like Uncle Sam could go, "Hey, Ma Bell, do this, not that, but knock that other thing off." And they'd actually listen because it was a monopoly by permission to a great extent for 60 odd years, right? Whereas Apple, Google, to go to where we are now, but they don't answer really. And this is the crux of the monopoly issue. They don't really answer directly to much of, of anybody at the moment, which is kind of, and you have the power vacuum as you talked about earlier on, power vacuum in terms of effective governance. So you've got the quasi governance, moves by incredibly influential digital companies. I'm curious about your perspective, and we tread on dangerous ground, but hey, we get to do that. On balance, I would much rather have the market and fumbling with the government, trying to figure out the right solution or the workable solution for these issues of privacy and agency than what I see in, let's say, China, where you don't get an option and there's one set of folks in control. And if you don't like it, yeah, you still don't get an option.
So is your question, am I pro autocracy or
Well, no, it's like,
or
would you
or
would you
pro
rather would you rather we had
democracy?
would you rather we had super strong federally set policy about these privacy issues and not the sort of marketplace mess of Apple doing one thing and Google doing another thing?
I'm, again, I feel like we've waded into very deep political water, but for my point of view, I'm very much a fan of regulated capitalism. And right now,
That's fair.
there's not a whole lot of regulating going on. And I think that's sort of the core problem.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, Elizabeth Warren, now just like uttering her name will cause some people to break out in hives. But
Yeah.
her whole thing is that she's a capitalist. But you can't have capitalism if it's not regulated, because then it becomes something else.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like what people are arguing about, like, okay, how much is capitalism breaking down because it's unregulated?
Mm.
And I think you see a lot of small businesses, especially in the tech sphere, that would argue that like the capitalist market is not functioning properly because of the big players. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of regulated capitalism because I feel like that's what actually maximizes things. That's what maximizes opportunities, maximizes innovation. There's no question that like the big four, mega tech companies, like they stop innovation, they squash it out because they see it as a threat. So I like innovation.
I do too. Yeah, ditto. Let's go back to email for a second because we did
Yeah,
wade into
please.
deep water. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to me, and this will be email and the sort of capital political sphere combined. It's interesting to me how much the battleground for how email is going to work right now and what's changing and how we can adapt to it is mobile centric, while you've got a ton of people, including the two of us sitting here talking via desktops, handling their email on their desktop, and Microsoft doing really, really well from a capitalist perspective and managing to duck a lot of the monopoly rocks that are being thrown. And somehow this other device that we use for a lot of other things, which is a key email conduit as well, seems to be a little bit out of the fray at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, well, Microsoft, in the 90s, they had their brush.
Yeah, it was there.
with monopoly
Yeah.
language, the EU, which probably, the EU was what came down on Microsoft in the 90s. And frankly, the EU is what's coming down on Apple and Alphabet now. Like, the EU seems to still function and is able to police these things in a way that America can't seem to be able to find time to do.
I think the lobbying structure is different among other things, but right?
Yeah, but I think we can look to the EU as sort of they're the leading edge of these innovations. GDPR, was way ahead of us, and now we have CCPA, which is sort of like a default GDPR for the US, and we're creeping towards having to have something that is very similar to GDPR just because so many states are passing their own thing, right? And both sides of the house agree that once too many states have conflicting regulations, that's one of the things that that Congress, both sides of the aisle, can agree requires their attention. When things get onerous, and it's difficult to comply, that is actually one of the very few things that seems to motivate Congress to actually do anything
Well, that's
in the business sphere.
observation. Yeah, in the business sphere, that's fair observation. One of the real victims in this mix. I mean, much of the stuff that we've touched on in the last 45 minutes has been that it is harder and more expensive to be effective at email marketing because of this turbulence. I mean, the kind of coherence of data flow in your description of how we're going to potentially replace this signal, the feedback from open. It's like a lot of companies don't have their house so in order that they can go, oh, we sent him this, he clicked over here, so yes, keep emailing him. And that's an expensive hobby, getting things that tightly knit. That is not an easy thing to pull off.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. When I think about sort of future changes, I also think about things like CDPs, consumer data
Yeah,
platforms, where you
yeah,
need to get all of your data sort of in one place,
yeah,
and also cleaned up, which is one of the things that CDPs does, is that it unifies
yeah,
all
yeah.
the kind of conflicting data, so you get like that single version of the truth that, frankly, we've been talking about forever. I
Forever.
remember when I was at ExactTarget, like 2013, we were talking about that 360-degree view of subscribers and
Yeah.
customers. Now all these years later, we're finally at a point where that's a realistic, attainable goal. So I think CDPs will be kind of clutch to being able to work out a lot of this stuff, because you're right, the data is all over the place and it's not always clean. So getting into one place and getting it clean is a major thing. I think one of the things that email marketing has going for it is that for a very long time, you've been able to do a pretty crummy job of email marketing
Yeah.
and still generate a
It's still
pretty good,
yeah.
pretty good profit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, is the bar being raised? Is it becoming, more expensive? I think it is.
Yeah.
And in many ways, though, it's encouraging us to do a lot of things that we should have been doing,
Yeah.
frankly, a long
No, I think
time ago.
that's a fair point. Yeah.
And I think, in line with that, I think we should not be confused by cost and return. I think one of the things that has plagued our industry forever has been this focus on how much things cost. And you see that even in how ESPs express their prices. We express our prices as though we're selling ad space. So
Yeah.
it's like a CPM, which is insane. It's insane that we still use that pricing model, as if it's a volume game.
Yeah.
It's not. It's an intelligence game.
Yes.
And there's been efforts by many brands to try to change the way that we price out marketing, but the
But they're
CPM model, like
saying-
everyone, like what they'll do is they'll adjust it down to a CPM. So
Yeah.
they'll say like, oh, I hear you charging for like this data storage and this and that. But to compare apples to apples when you're evaluating multiple ESPs,
Yeah.
it all gets like rolled up into a CPM, which
Yeah.
is a horrible way to
Well,
think about email marketing. So
and we-
bad. But again, my point is that are things going to get more expensive? Yes. But the
Yeah.
ROI is still very much
Yeah.
well and super healthy for email marketing. So I hope that, as we enter this new age where things are more complex, that people keep their eye on the ball, which is returns. Email marketing is an investment. Relationships are an investment.
Absolutely.
And you need to focus on what are the returns you're getting out of that, not how much you're outlaying up
Yeah.
front. Because I
Right,
think there are going to be
yeah.
elevated costs.
Yeah. Well, I'll drag this into the market because I agree with everything you're saying. Well put. I suspect one of the 12 billion reasons that Intuit plucked down the money they did to buy MailChimp is because they see a longer term opportunity to help the small business have that house in order, right? Like, does my accountant have my phone number and address correct? You bet your Bippy they do. They actually have to, right? They have to have that data straight. Okay. If they were keeping track of their, email as well, okay, maybe you can bolt it onto that same thing. Like I wonder if there's not a surprisingly uber CDP move afoot with that purchase.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in my mind, there's been a very clear trend in the ESP marketplace towards a best of suite approach, about creating an ecosystem. And I feel that certainly once you get up into like the mid market, like standalone systems make less and less sense. That you need an ecosystem, you need a ESP that is natively integrated into other channels and other systems. I'm biased. I will admit my bias. It's one of the reasons I'm very happy here at Oracle, because this is the mentality that we have, and we tightly integrate all the things that we do, and that allows for that, like that real-time flow. So we live in a real-time omni-channel world, and if you don't have real-time flows across multiple channels, you are at a disadvantage because consumers expect us to be able to operate that way. So yeah, again, admitting fully my biases, but it seems to me also that that's what everybody is doing. And you mentioned MailChimp. I think that like they have been, even before this, part of an ecosystem. They have commerce operations. Like it's so clear to me that in a world where like that MarTech technology map is now at like 8,000 companies,
Just
8,000 companies, just incredible that the complexity has become too great. Now, I remember covering technology in the early 2000s, and there would be the single provider versus like, the best of breed discussion. And it was a joke. It was a joke then because the best of breed always won because frankly, you didn't need that many vendors. And the single provider, like it wasn't good. It wasn't good. You didn't really have, it wasn't a real choice. But the consequence now of like 15, 20 years of choosing best of breed over and over again, as more and more new technologies come into the stack. Now we've got like just this Frankenstein's monster of a MarTech stack. And we've got all these different vendors that we have to have relations with, all these different contracts we have to negotiate, all these different APIs we have to stay on top of and manage. So anytime one little thing changes in this ecosystem, it shakes up everything. So, in my mind, and looking at what's going on in the marketplace, it seems just crystal clear where this is all headed, which is towards more ecosystems and way fewer best of breed vendors.
So you get to play like you get your Twilio, your MessageBird, like because best of breed, too much breeding is essentially what you just said. Agreed.
Complexity, just a lot of complexity.
Yeah, and a level of technical execution that's really flippin' expensive to keep running. Like that's just hard.
The management is no joke. So so like sometimes like I heard someone sort of like knocking on some of the bigger vendors because they like invest too much in integration instead of like product features, and like that's part of the product is the integration. And if your vendor is not investing in integration, guess who is? You are. You're paying for that. So you're paying for it either way. If I'm a business, I'd rather that my vendor pay for the integration rather than me, because if they're paying for it, it's controlled and they've mitigated the risk. Whereas if they hand that off to me, now the risk isn't mitigated and I have the cost. So, again, when you think about like, if you're a retailer, what's your business? Your business is retail. So you should be retailing and not, becoming a technology company. If you're a travel company, focus on being a travel company. And, tech is important, but I reject this idea completely that like every company is a tech company. I think that's just utter nonsense. That's how like tech companies get you to make bad decisions about how complicated you're becoming. No, I think we're now at that stage where a retailer is a retailer and a travel company is a travel company, you know.
Well, we're getting there, and this the signal that we've really started to get there is that 8,000 on the big Martech graphic will actually start dropping at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. Every major company in the U.S. or the world had a VP of electricity. Now none of them do. Why? Because you just buy it, right? And now you've got CIO, CTO, CISO at travel companies. And eventually it'll be like, no, we're in the travel business. Why do we have someone who's like main thing is not travel, right? Other stuff.
Yeah, no, I look forward to the day where, like I think some people, some brands have thought that like their competitive advantage comes from some of that technology, and
Hmm.
which sometimes it does,
Possible.
for sure.
Possible.
Sometimes it does, but I'm hopeful that we're getting back to where the competitive advantage comes from is operations and like how you actually do your core business rather than how you try to innovate on the technology layer.
Yeah.
Again, I think we're pivoting. I think again, best of suite hasn't really been, like prior to say 5 years ago, was not really a viable choice. But I think that the marketplace has changed, and it's changed for a reason. Vis-a-vis the 8,000 vendors and like all the complexity. So I think best of suite is a response to this growing fracturing of the marketplace. So again, it's clear in like every deal that you see happening right now is that you see this, every company is trying to build an ecosystem and add layers and add connections, so that you can get closer to this real-time omni-channel, cross-departmental organization, which is again where consumers are, right? Which is they're the ones driving everything. Consumer expectations drive everything. We are catching up. And this is how we're catching up, is by this reorganization of the marketplace.
Wow. Man, it's gonna be a fun ride, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. No doubt.
Any since I tied up way over an hour of your time already, any parting thoughts about like just put the clock maybe 12 months out? What are some of the big things that you expect to see, either positive adaptation or yet more upset, that we're going to have to grapple with in email marketing?
Oh gosh, well, I hope that the rest of the year is smooth as glass. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be more challenges and a bit more upheaval. So I think we're going to stay in the same mode that we've kind of been in for the last 2 years, of like being really nimble and focusing on the basics. I think that's very much where we're going to be. I long for us to get past some of this. Again, things like AMP, I feel like have like truly suffered, and maybe perhaps terminally because of this. But I'd love for us to get back to focusing, a bit more on like the real future and not managing, sort of like the moment or the latest crises. And getting more to like long-term roadmap stuff, which I think is more omni-channel, I think is more AI, I think there's like tons of upside there. And certainly we're making some progress, but I think we'd be making way more if things were running a little bit. Yeah, if we weren't fighting as many fires, I think we'd be talking a lot more about AI and ML than we are right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like all the organizational energy and budget and so on that's really going to playing whack-a-mole with data, right? What do you mean that's not an open whack, right? Like, are there prefetching whack? Like, there's a whole bunch of smart people tying up a whole bunch of time trying to figure out the mess instead of going, God, we could do something really cool that our customers would love.
Yeah, all the energy that we're spending on MPP right now is just to get back to where we were pre-MPP. So, which is going to be a tall order in and of itself. But yeah, that's one of the frustrating things. Like, how much time is the average organization going to lose trying to mitigate the damage caused by MPP? I think it's going to be just a lot. And that energy absolutely could be spent elsewhere, making the customer and the subscriber relationship better. Automation, segmentation, personalization, all these things, delivering the right message to the right person at the right time, via the right channel.
Yeah.
That is where a lot of our energy has been spent, and making great experiences. And that's not what we're doing right now with MPP. Is it's diverting a lot of attention. So I think that's, again, some of it is good. It's causing us to look further down the funnel. It's causing us to reevaluate attribution, causing us to focus more on omni-channel. So it's not all bad.
But
But I do think there is a lot of action in the MPP space. That's just, how do we mitigate this risk? And it's not improving anything for our subscribers really at all, which is unfortunate. It's not wasted energy, but it's not improving things. We're not moving forward.
got it. Well, Chad, I knew this would be fun, but it's even more fun than I thought it would be. Wonderful to get to hear your thoughts on things in email marketing.
Thanks. No, this has been fun.
Well,
I know we treaded on a lot of sensitive topics. I
That's-
hope everyone
you know
just
what? We're people,
takes
right?
it in stride.
Take it in
and the way
stride.
that it's meant.
And
know,
it'll be
I-
and it's a moment in time, a particularly fraught moment in time. I mean, the fact that Ukraine is still standing as we sit here is not something that you can actually just ignore. And there's going to be a point where this is archived, and the state of that state will be very different. And I'd like I'd like to see it be different than the trend line at the moment. Well, I'll hit the stop record. My guest has been Chad S. White, author and great guy and head of research at Oracle Marketing Consulting. Thanks, Chad.
no, thanks for having me.